Ukraine has been launching a literal invasion into Russia for now, what will be likely over a week once you all watch this video. And this invasion, which of course is rubber stamped by NATO, has injected a level of enthusiasm not seen since the Western mainstream media hyped up the 2023 counteroffensive, which ended up failing. But really, we haven't seen this kind of enthusiasm for a literal action, one that is undergoing, an operation that is ongoing, since the 2022 offensive launched by Ukraine, which saw Russia have to pull back from many key areas of the front line. And of course, now we know that this was part of Russia's overall strategy, but then it was seen as a major loss from Russia. But this invasion by Ukraine is into the Kursk region, okay, which is across the Ukrainian-Russian border, right, about parallel with a Ukrainian territory called Sumy. And it is said that Ukraine had been making, beginning at the end of the first week of August, when they launched this operation, over a dozen kilometers of progress into this region. And there was also reports that missiles, Ukraine was launching NATO, NATO sorties at the Kursk power plant, nuclear power plant, which Russia struck down. But if it would have hit, we would have had something much bigger than Chernobyl on our hands. That's how dangerous this has all gotten. But according to the Western mainstream media, this is a time to celebrate. And here is what The Guardian has to say about it. Ukraine aims to destabilize Russia with thousands of troops in Kursk incursion. Official says Kiev is seeking to stretch the enemy and that Western partners have been indirectly involved. Well, of course, there is nothing that Ukraine does without the collective West, in particular, the United States. So, thousands of Ukrainian troops are taking part in an incursion aiming to destabilize Russia by showing up the country's weaknesses, a top official from Ukraine has said as the assault enters the sixth day. So this was the sixth day as of, I believe, this was written August 11th. So it began technically August 5th. We're on the offensive, okay, says this unnamed official. The aim is to stretch the positions of the enemy, to inflict maximum losses, and to destabilize the situation in Russia as they are unable to protect their own border. And I'm going to show you with a wonderful analysis of the battlefield situation by Brian Berletic, why this is so absolutely and incredibly stupid of Ukraine. An incredibly stupid move. This is a dumb move. This is not a good move. This is not a strategic move. Now, Russia was caught off guard. And a lot of people who believe in Russia's position say, well, they got here. They got. Not so fast, and we're gonna talk to you about why. So Russia's army has said about 1,000 Ukrainian troops were deployed in the cross-border incursion that began on Tuesday, August 5th, and appeared to catch the Kremlin off guard, allowing Ukrainian forces to penetrate Russia's defensive lines. According to the official, it's a lot more than the 1,000 troop figure. Okay, that Russia was saying that it's thousands. So this operation, this is the this is the enthusiasm, right? Ukrainian troops are advancing several kilometers into the Kursk region, forcing Russia's army and to rush in reserves and extra equipment. Neither side has given precise details of the forces committed. Russia has evacuated tens of thousands of civilians, and Ukraine has also evacuated thousands of people from the Sumy region across the border, which I was telling you about. The operation has greatly raised our morale, says the Ukrainian official, of the army, the state, and society. It has shown we can go on the offensive and move forward. It seems the Russians have problems with coordination, preparedness, and action. But the official explained there have been little effect so far on fighting in the east. That's unchanged. Their pressure in the east continues. They're not pulling troops out of that area. The intensity of Russian attacks has gone down only a little bit. There's no idea of annexation. We are operating in strict accordance with international law, which is hilarious because literally the United States and NATO have armed Ukraine to the teeth and have green lighted attacks on Russian territory. And now Ukraine is invading Russian territory. That's akin to international law. That's hypocrisy, because this is what they've been claiming Russia has been doing all of this time. But let us get into the nuts and bolts of this invasion. And Brian Berletic published this great video, which we are going to react to, because his analysis of the situation is really important, because he is going to tell you about what is happening actually on the battlefield and how it relates to this Kursk invasion. It does not spell optimism for Ukraine, as we're hearing in the Western mainstream media. Here we go.
Ukraine decided to take some of its best units off the line of contact that they are incapable of holding and sent them on an incursion into Kursk, Russia. This is inside pre-2014 Russian borders, indisputably internationally recognized Russian territory. And this is the first time the Ukrainian government has openly done this. They had done this before in Belgorod, but they had claimed at the time that these were militant groups separate from the Ukrainian government, even though they were using Ukrainian military equipment and also American military equipment. So it was obviously a Ukrainian government operation, but they were attempting to maintain some sort of plausible deniability. In this case, they're not even trying to do that. They are just openly sending their forces into Kursk. Let's take a look at the battlefield. This is via liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian live map. Keep that in mind as we look at it. And as I've been pointing out every single week, Russian forces continue to advance along the entire line of contact, including right now. And you can see all these red rifle icons. This is where Russian forces are pushing. You can see it extends along the entirety of the line of contact from west of Donetsk and Avdiivka into New York. There's a Ukrainian town called New York. They're advancing towards Torsk. They are moving into Chasiv Yar,
which is really important. Chasiv Yar, that is a key logistical hub. If Russia cuts off Chasiv Yar from Ukraine, it'll be very difficult to get supplies to that part of the front. And hence, and that's where you see, I mean, I'm not a military expert, and Brian Berletic is reading this map, but you see just all of the areas where that red is moving. I call it the battle of the bulge, right? Russia's bulges are moving. That is Russian forces moving. You don't see a lot of blue here. You don't see a lot of blue. That would signify Ukraine. You don't see it.
West of Bakhmut, they are encircling Seversk. They continue advancing on Kupiansk. In Kharkov, they also have this new front that they had opened up in Kharkov. The point of opening that new front was to overextend Ukrainian forces. And the Ukrainian military itself admitted that they do not have enough troops to hold the line of contact in the Donbas region and also stop the advance of Russian forces in Kharkov. But now they've taken brigades worth of manpower and equipment and sent it into Kursk. Let's take a look at that on the map. So this was the new front that Russian forces opened up in Kharkov. This is the incursion, the Ukrainian incursion. And even though it looks like they've entered into and are holding all of this territory, what even Ukrainian sources are admitting is that they rushed along roads. There is a Ukrainian troop presence spread out in this area, but they do not hold it. They have not consolidated control over it, at least not yet. It is unlikely they will do so. How can they do so? If they do not have the ability to hold their own territory along the line of contact, how are they going to be able to hold this territory inside what is indisputably Russian territory? Now, people have said Russia overstretched Ukrainian troops by opening up the Kharkov front. Why can't it be a good idea for Ukraine to overextend Russian troops by opening up a front in Kursk? The reason it makes absolutely no sense is because Russia has extra troops to open new fronts. As they are grinding down Ukrainian forces, they are expanding their own military power. They have more troops constantly coming in adding to the forces that are already there. Ukraine cannot even replace the troops that it is losing along the line of contact.
And I comment on that. It is estimated that Russia will have a 2-to-1 manpower advantage by the end of the year. Literally tens of thousands of Russians per month are joining the Russian armed forces to complete this special military operation. Ukraine has the exact opposite problem. So the fact that Ukraine is literally entering into Kursk in order and saying they're not going to occupy it. Well, what is the strategy here? What could they possibly gain? It seems like they are actually doing what they've done throughout this conflict, which is sending themselves into their own oblivion.
They have no troops to spare. They are incapable of opening a new front and somehow extending Russian forces. Russia has forces. They can commit to Kursk while maintaining the same troop levels elsewhere along the line of contact. Ukraine cannot do that. So it makes absolutely no sense strategically or even tactically. This, in the long run, is going to accelerate the collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. Now, people are asking, well, why did they do this? Is this an attempt to seize and hold territory and have a bargaining chip with Russia?
That is what we are hearing. And I'm going to end it here because I am going to pull up the document that the Rand Corporation completed and wrote in 2019 about what their plan for Russia has been all along and why Ukraine is so just ripe to be the sacrificial lamb for NATO. And what we are hearing in the mainstream media is, one, there was the idea that Ukraine was going to take the nuclear power plant in Kursk, and that would be a huge point of leverage for Ukraine to force Russia into negotiations in order to begin the process of de-escalating Russia, right? Demilitarizing Russia, creating a situation where Russia would have to give up something in order to get Ukraine out of its territory. Well, they're not going to reach it. It's already been over a week. It's not going to happen. They haven't even gotten close to the power plant. They tried to fire at the power plant. That was intercepted. Those missiles were struck down by air defense systems. So that is off the table. So now they've penetrated 10, 15 kilometers. We don't exactly know the exact number. They've penetrated into Kursk, and they're sitting ducks. Russia has already said that they are methodically destroying Ukraine's forces, destroying NATO equipment, NATO vehicles, armored vehicles, etc. It's going to end up being the same result as what we've seen on the front line. But this time, Ukraine has even crossed what NATO's red line was, because NATO, even though they said they could greenlight attacks into Russia, they didn't say they could invade Russia. They didn't say that, even though, of course, they encouraged it and really brought it about through their greenlighting of attacks on Russian territory. So the idea that this was going to give Ukraine leverage, right? And I'm just going to pull up the Washington Post really quickly, because they wrote in the Washington Post wrote an article about a morale boost, right? And at the end of the article, okay, they said, though Russian officials have claimed that Ukrainian advance has been halted, Moscow announced a counterterrorism operation on Saturday for 3 regions along Ukraine's border and entails heightened security, such as the ability to forcibly resettle civilians, check documents, vehicles, and monitor calls. Authorities can also restrict internet access and limit communications. The Western diplomat, unnamed, they don't want to say what their name is. Before the operation, Ukraine had nothing to negotiate. Now it is different. So, because Russia had to respond, the idea here is that now Ukraine has some leverage. But what leverage do they have? They are sitting on territory that they will eventually be expelled from. They cannot keep this up. They haven't been able to keep it up on the front lines. They are short of everything: ammunition, artillery, manpower, on and on and on. They're short of everything, and yet we are made to believe that because they've taken what they have left and attempted a really just reckless invasion of Russia's own territory, that this is going to be the saving grace for Ukraine is absolutely ridiculous. And this is not just Brian Berletic, and it is not just myself that is saying this. This is also people that have deep relationships to, let's say, the European Union. The attack on the Kursk region may be the beginning of the end of the military of Ukraine. This is from a military expert of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, Gustav Gressel. If you don't know anything about the Council on Foreign Relations, well, it is a CIA cutout. So the CIA cutout is saying this is a bad idea, the Europe version of it. Attacked. So this is what Gustav Gressel had to say in an interview with Der Spiegel magazine. If Ukraine seeks to hold territory for a few months, it will lead to military costs that can hardly be covered. The expansion of the front line is profitable above all for Russia. It has more weapons, ammunition, and people that it can use on a wider front. The effect of the surprise threatens to quickly turn against Ukraine. The expert noted that Moscow could send additional forces to the Kursk region, which it is doing, which would first contain the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces, which it has done, and then tire them out, which will happen. He pointed out that in the meantime, Kiev is exhausting its resources in Donbass, and if the front collapses, Ukraine will have to one way or another leave the territories of Kursk, transfer all of these forces again to the east. There could be greater territorial losses as a result. He recalled that in Germany, the camp of Sarah Wagenknecht, who opposes the supply of weapons to Kiev, enjoys significant popularity. Ukraine may seem like an unreliable daredevil. Berlin and Washington could withdraw their support. The maneuvers in the Kursk region could be the beginning of the military end of Ukraine, said Gressel. Ukraine is in a difficult situation due to insignificant military assistance of its partners. It cannot win a war in purely traditional ways, so it tries risky operations. But in this way, he risks completely losing support of the West, he being Zelensky. Okay? So this is from someone in the European Council on Foreign Relations who says the element of surprise, the idea of trying to stick it in the eyes of Russia, to stick it in the eye of Vladimir Putin, to stick it in the eye of the Russian armed forces, that's not going to win anything but a temporary reprieve and salvo for your own ego. And that's all you hear about is morale boost. Maybe we'll be able to negotiate from a position of strength. All of this is fantasy. In fact, what will this serve to do? You just invaded Russian territory. UAF, the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The NATO just aided an invasion on Russia's territory. They're not even framing it as a special military operation like Russia did. They're not even framing it as being within the bounds of international law, even though you see some of these Ukrainian officials, unnamed former Ukrainian officials say, oh yeah, it is within international law. No, it's not. But nonetheless, they are boasting about invading Russia, even as they're claiming Russia is simply invading them, that they're giving them a taste of their own medicine. Well, unfortunately, the reality on the ground says that there will be a huge price to pay for this, as there has been a huge price to pay this entire conflict for Ukraine. This is such a major risk that could indeed lead to Ukraine's ultimate collapse militarily, that even places like the Sunday Times, okay, this is the British Sunday Times, invading Russia is Zelensky's riskiest decision yet. Crack troops are being used for a risky counterpunch to Putin that astonished the world, and the fingerprints of Ukraine's president are all over it, okay? So this is from Michael Clark on August 10th. This is Zelensky's idea, right? He never wants to retreat. He never wants to settle this conflict. And here Michael Clark says they were hesitant at first to do this. Manpower and resource problems. Why would you, if you're losing a war, beleaguer yourself deeper into a much bigger problem later on, right? It's short-term aesthetic surface level gains for long-term brutal defeat. That's essentially what they're trading here. Okay. And that's what Michael Clark is saying, is that Zelensky, because of this, is desperate to reverse the narrative that Ukraine is losing. And this was the bold and risky move that he chose. because Moscow has not seen a meter of its own territory invaded since 1941. And there's some who bragged about this, even though this is nothing to brag about, because what happened in 1941? The Nazis invaded Russia. This isn't Canadian Parliament, clap, clap, clap for the Nazis. This is a real and deep problem, right? Russia, what they are occupying or what they have annexed or put into a referendum, those are territories with majority Russian-speaking people that voted in 90+%. There were referendums held, whether you think they're legitimate or not. I am just talking about what has happened. I'm talking about people who have traveled there, who have said this. People now who are under investigation from the FBI, mind you, like friend Scott Ritter. So it also makes some Western. So there's consequences, right? Because even though it may be difficult for Russia to manage, it will also make some Western leaders queasy, as items that NATO has sent are now being used inside of Russia, another threshold crossed. If Ukrainian leaders had asked Western permission in advance, they wouldn't have gotten it, so they went ahead anyway. And here's a little bit of a map of what's going on. Suja seems to be the city. The power plant is very far away, closer to the center of the Kursk city. So anyway, the plan is risky, and Moscow has no choice but to do whatever it takes to snuff out the incursion. They're trying to compare it to the Korean War, which is very interesting and to me absolutely ridiculous, because the Korean War was an invasion by the United States, right? And off, if you compare Ukraine to the U.S. with regard to Korea, you are making the comparison that people like myself, the point that people like myself have been trying to make, and that I think have made convincingly, that, yeah, Ukraine is in fact a proxy for an offensive war with Russia, just like the United States waged an offensive war in Korea. But it's a ridiculous comparison, right? Because nothing like Incheon is going to happen in Kursk. Ukraine is not having. That's the risk here, is that they can't repeat that kind of success, that brutal success that we could say the U.S. had. I don't believe it's a success. I believe it was war crimes. But nonetheless, they're not gonna get that. Okay, so they need to make a lot of points here. Ukrainian forces around Kursk might hope to extend their reach as far as occupying the nuclear power plant. Not going to happen. A quid pro quo for Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhia plant, which in Zaporizhia, that nuclear power plant is up in smoke as we speak. But all these, and that's because Ukraine keeps hitting it. They're creating a potential nuclear disaster because they keep striking at it. All these objectives will depend on how long and what way Ukrainians hold inside of, inside of the territory. But this is the big point here. Kiev is evidently prepared to risk valuable soldiers and equipment to make some sort of stand in Kursk. Zelensky's critics will argue that this is a misuse of both lives and troops and heavy metal that Ukraine desperately needs to further in the Donbass. Unlike Incheon landings in Korea, this counterpunch cannot turn the war around. Instead, its military success will be measured by how dearly the Ukrainians can make Moscow pay for the eventual recovery of their territory. If the struggle is long and the price is high, Ukrainian forces may feel disproportionate benefit elsewhere. Its political success will depend on how it plays on Moscow's psychology, whether it creates genuine doubt within Putin's circle that the war is really worth the ever-increasing costs. The Kremlin's initial reaction is to pass the attack off as a terrorist attack and provocation, but to them it looks like straightforward war. And this is a big insult to Zelensky and Ukraine, right? By saying that this is going to depend on outcomes that are not going to happen, what Michael Clark is saying here is that Ukraine is effed. When Zelensky, the comedian turned politician, appeared in the Kiev street just hours into the 2022 Russian invasion to declare that he was going nowhere and Ukraine would fight, he took the biggest strategic decision of his life. This week, he took the second biggest and probably the more risky. Why is it risky? Because this counterpunch cannot turn the war around. Its military success will be measured by how dearly they can make Moscow pay. So they're hoping on hope here that Russia will just lose a lot of troops and that it'll be embarrassing for them. But Ukraine won't be able to make any changes on that vaunted battlefield. They won't be able to make any changes geopolitically, politically, militarily, anything. There is no victory here for Ukraine other than the potential for Russia to be embarrassed and hoping that Russians will stand up and overthrow the government and all of this just fantasy. But this is all part of the strategy. Doesn't help Ukraine, right? You think, wow, this is after watching this, you're thinking, wow, this is absolutely suicidal. Why would Ukraine do this? Well, They're doing this because this is U.S. policy. Extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. And so I'm only showing you, this is the RAND Corporation website, but I'm going to pull up the report now. This is a report that was written in 2019, and there's an editor's note, right, to read since the invasion, but it was published April 24th, 2019, before the special military operation. And now I'm going to pull up the actual report here, the PDF of the report. Yes, you can see that. Extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. Okay, so this was written by the RAND Corporation, which is essentially the Pentagon's research institution. It's think tank. Okay, and I'm going to actually go down to the part I want to talk about risks of its overall strategy to extend Russia via Ukraine. Because what does extending Russia mean? Well, in this report, extending Russia means that Russia will be bogged down, okay, bogged down in many different areas of indirect U.S. and NATO support on all fronts, from economic warfare to various diplomatic wrangling, NATO expansion, etc. And this is the portion on Ukraine and what might happen if the U.S. and NATO decide to use Ukraine as a battering ram to overextend Russia's military. Okay, so what will happen if Ukraine, right? If aid is increased to Ukraine, and that these arms then to Ukraine provoke a counter escalation, which is what happened in 2022 of February, committing more troops and pushing them deeper into Ukraine. Russia might even preempt U.S. action, escalating before any additional U.S. aid arrives. Such escalation might extend Russia. Eastern Ukraine is already a drain. Taking more of Ukraine might only increase the burden, albeit at the expense of the Ukrainian people. However, such a move might also come at a significant cost to Ukraine and to U.S. prestige and credibility. This could produce disproportionately large Ukrainian casualty, territorial losses, and refugee flows. It might even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace. This is exactly what is happening. And this is what Kursk represents. It is not going to lead to an advantageous peace, to the reversal of territorial losses. Absolutely not. This is going to continue to deepen Ukraine's absolutely dire situation, where we have already seen hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops eliminated. Just how many billions of dollars worth of NATO weaponry eliminated? How many millions of Ukrainians displaced? This is not good. This is a catastrophe for Ukraine, and something that no one should be cheering for. But this is what the United States, this is what the RAND Corporation, this is what the U.S. foreign policy blob, this is what they drew up from years ago, from before the special military operation. That's what they were hoping all along, and that's what Kursk represents, because the United States has encouraged this. So we've seen that even the European Council on Foreign Relations, even someone in that part of the U.S. and European foreign policy blob, they're saying this is the end of Ukraine if they decide to take this to its logical conclusion, which is the wasting away of Ukraine's military resources and what's left of its manpower inside of an invasion of Russian territory that won't lead to any effective gains or victory on the battlefield. Actually, what is likely to happen here is that Russia is only going to get hardened, is only going to continue its war of attrition, and is only going to continue to prepare the unthinkable, which is what nobody in the world wants, which is the preparation of nuclear warfare, of first use strikes. This is what Russia has been warning about when there's been talks about strikes on its territory. So this is a situation we are in when it comes to Kursk, and you can bet everything that Russia is not going to stand down. Russia is not going to lose this fight in Kursk, that whatever gains Ukraine has accumulated over its week plus long, enthusiastic, reckless invasion of Russian territory will backfire dramatically. And even mainstream political and military figures in the Western media are saying so now, and you better believe they're going to be saying so as this continues.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.